Have you ever looked at your relationships and noticed a pattern you can't ignore? Different people, different situations, but somehow the same outcome. You give your time, your energy, your emotions, and eventually, things turn unhealthy, draining, or even painful. At some point, the question naturally comes up, why does this keep happening? It's easy to assume it's just bad luck, that you've simply met the wrong people over and over again. And while circumstances do play a role, patterns like this are rarely random. There are usually deeper psychological and emotional reasons behind why certain types of people keep showing up in your life, and more importantly, why they stay. One of the biggest reasons is familiarity. As strange as it sounds, people are often drawn to what feels familiar, even if it isn't healthy. If you've experienced certain dynamics in the past, whether in friendships, family, or early relationships, your mind starts to recognize that pattern as normal. So when you meet someone who behaves in a similar way, it doesn't immediately feel wrong. It feels recognizable. That familiarity can create a sense of comfort, even when the behavior itself is unhealthy. You might not consciously choose it, but something about it feels known, and that makes it easier to engage with. Over time, this can lead to repeatedly attracting people who reflect those same patterns. Another reason is boundaries, or the lack of them. When your boundaries are unclear, inconsistent, or too flexible, it creates space for people to overstep them, and toxic individuals are often very quick to notice this. They tend to gravitate toward people who are more likely to tolerate behavior that others would immediately reject. This doesn't mean you're weak. In many cases, it means you're understanding, patient, and willing to give people chances. But without clear limits, that willingness can be taken advantage of. When someone realizes they can push boundaries without consequences, the behavior often continues and even escalates. There's also the role of overgiving. If you're someone who naturally gives a lot emotionally, mentally, or even physically, you may find yourself attracting people who are more focused on taking than giving. At first, it might feel like you're just being kind or supportive, but over time, the balance starts to shift. You might notice that you're always the one checking in, always the one fixing problems, always the one putting in effort. And instead of that effort being matched, it becomes expected. Toxic people often rely on this dynamic, where one person carries the emotional weight of the relationship while they benefit from it. Another important factor is self-worth. How you see yourself often influences what you accept from others. If deep down, you don't fully believe you deserve consistent respect, care, and effort, you may tolerate behavior that doesn't meet those standards. This can show up in subtle ways: excusing red flags, giving repeated chances without change, staying longer than you should because you hope things will improve. Over time, this creates a pattern where toxic behavior isn't just encountered, it's allowed to continue. There's also something known as the fixer mindset. Some people feel drawn to those who seem broken, struggling, or in need of help. It can come from a genuine place of empathy. You see potential in them, you believe they can change, and you want to be the person who helps them get there. But this often leads to imbalance. Instead of a mutual connection, the relationship becomes a project. You invest time and energy trying to support or fix them, while your own needs take a back seat. And in many cases, the other person doesn't change, not because they can't, but because they're not taking responsibility for their own growth. Another reason toxic patterns repeat is emotional intensity. Toxic relationships often come with highs and lows, moments of strong connection, followed by conflict or distance. That intensity can feel like passion, especially if you're not used to stable, consistent connections. But intensity and stability are not the same. In fact, constant emotional ups and downs can create a kind of attachment that feels strong but is actually unhealthy. You become used to the cycle, and without realizing it, you may start associating that intensity with connection itself. There's also the role of early red flags. In many situations, the signs are there from the beginning, but they're easy to overlook. Maybe the person is inconsistent, dismissive, or overly controlling in small ways. But instead of addressing it early, you give them the benefit of the doubt. This is where patterns begin. When red flags are ignored, they don't disappear, they grow, and toxic individuals often rely on this. They test boundaries early on, and if those boundaries aren't enforced, they continue pushing further. It's also important to recognize that toxic people don't always appear toxic at first. In fact, many of them are initially very charming, attentive, and engaging. They know how to create a strong first impression, and that initial connection can make it harder to see the shift when their behavior changes. By the time the toxic patterns become clear, you're already emotionally invested, and that investment makes it harder to step back, even when you start to feel the impact. Another factor is the fear of being alone. When that fear is strong, it can influence your decisions more than you realize. You might stay in unhealthy situations longer than you should, or accept behavior that doesn't align with your values, simply because the alternative feels uncertain. Toxic individuals can sense this, even if it's not expressed directly. And when they do, it can reinforce the dynamic where they have more control in the relationship. So what does all of this mean? It doesn't mean you're destined to keep attracting toxic people. It means there are patterns internal and external that can be recognized and changed. The first step is awareness, not just of the people you're attracting, but of your own responses, boundaries, and decisions within those relationships. Pay attention to how quickly you get invested. Notice how you react to red flags. Be honest about what you tolerate and why. The second step is boundaries. Clear, consistent boundaries change everything. They don't just protect your time and energy, they also filter the kind of people who stay in your life. Healthy people respect boundaries. Toxic people push against them, and that difference becomes clear very quickly. It's also important to shift your mindset from fixing others to choosing what's right for you. You're not responsible for changing someone else. You're responsible for deciding whether their behavior aligns with what you want in your life. And perhaps most importantly, work on how you see yourself. When your self-worth is strong, your standards naturally rise. You become less willing to accept behavior that doesn't match your values. And that alone can significantly reduce the likelihood of repeating toxic patterns. At the end of the day, attracting toxic people isn't always something you can completely control, but allowing them to stay is something you can influence. And once you start making different choices, setting different standards, and recognizing patterns earlier, the cycle begins to break. Because the goal isn't just to avoid toxic people, it's to build connections where respect, balance, and genuine care exist naturally. And that starts with how you understand yourself, your patterns, and what you truly deserve.